So it's 26 years ago this month that I graduated with my doctorate, and lots of memories with that, especially my daughter's wedding at the Pillar Church. You know, right across the street from that is Dimnett Chapel, where I walked across the stage to get 2 different degrees at different times. And it was kind of interesting. I remember moving to Muskegon and thinking, all right, this is really close to Western Seminary. I could go back there and get my doctorate really quite easily just because of the proximity to the seminary. I remember that we didn't have computers yet. We didn't have internet, no cell phones, and just can't imagine how I do it. I was halfway through the doctorate before I bought my first computer. So it was my kids can't even imagine that I actually got a master's degree without the internet, but I did. And it's kind of an interesting time. Now, driving to that seminary the first time for the first interview, I was very careful to pay attention to how far it was. And it was exactly 38 miles from my door to the seminary. And I thought, well, I can do this. So I went in and interviewed, and I had all the qualifications. You had to have a master's degree, and you have to have 5 years experience as a pastor. I'd had 10. They say you want to have 5 years so that they can figure out, because after 5 years, you're going to figure out where your weak areas are, and you can work on that. So I started it, but I think I probably quit 5 times before I finished it. I was working full-time. I had young kids. I was coaching soccer, and I thought, this is just overwhelming. I talked to one of the professors about that. I said, I'm going to have to pull out of this program. I just can't do it. He said, it's overwhelming to see how much work it was. And then he said to me, he goes, well, you were an old farm boy, right? Yeah. And he reminded me of haystacks. He said, now how do you move a haystack like this one? I said, well, it's really quite simple. You do it 1 bale at a time. And that actually worked. Now I have my ace in the hole because, I'm married to a farm girl who still knows how to throw a bale. That's from the trunk or treat last fall. And she's at the Greek Orthodox Church in Grand Rapids today because one of Jamie's home health care patients died, and they're doing a memorial for him. And so I can get by with showing her picture today. But, the principle worked with getting the doctorate. You do 1 unit at a time, and then before you know it, people call you doctor. It actually worked. And I tell people all the time, I am living proof that anybody who wants a PhD can get one. Because I did it, so you can too. And, I had ADD long before they even knew what that was. But it worked, and I'm proof. It does take grit, however. It took me 7 years to get it done, but I got it done, and it definitely changed my life. It changed how I do ministry. It changed everything. This concept of 1 bale at a time. For the Sunday services, I've got it broken down to 24 steps. And every Sunday, or every week, I go through those steps. It's kind of like a checklist, but it gets done that way, 1 step at a time. I'm just finished yesterday, step 12 for next Sunday, so I'm half done for it already. And that's kind of how that works. But 1 step at a time, it does get done. The grit is needed to sit in front of a computer and make it happen. The hardest part is always getting started. Now think of some major projects that you've done. Some of you restored cars 1 part at a time. Some of you have lost weight 1 pound at a time. Some of you built your own houses. That always amazes me because I don't know anything about construction. Some of you built your own houses, which has several steps in it. Or cleaning out your basement if you're a hoarder. 1 area at a time. It takes grit, it takes determination, and it takes purpose. Now, the Bible is full of stories about grit. And when grit is combined with faith, mountains can be moved. Jesus alluded to this. It's really quite a famous passage. He said, then Jesus told them, I tell you the truth. If you have faith and don't doubt, you can do things like this and much more. You can even say to this mountain, may you be lifted up and thrown into the sea, and it will happen. Now, of course, he didn't mean that literally, and there's all kinds of limitations. But how do you move a mountain? It's one shovelful at a time. That's how that works. Now, of course, there's limitations to this, but that's how it works. Now, the story of Ruth is the story of a woman with grit. She went through a lot of dark days, and she was facing homelessness and starvation. So we're going to continue her story today from Ruth. We're looking at chapter 3. And this is how the narrative goes. One day Naomi said to Ruth, my daughter, it's time that I found a permanent home for you so that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours, and he's been very kind by letting you gather grain with his young women. Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Now, that winnowing thing is something that I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up again. But what they do is they would have this flat area called a threshing floor, and it was in an area that had constant wind. They would look for a place to put it that had constant wind, probably just right off of the Mediterranean. And what they would do is they would put the grain still attached to the stalk, still attached to the straw, and lay it down on that floor, and then have oxen or horses walk over it to separate the heads of grain from the straw. Then they would take a fork and pitch the straw up in the air, and the wind would come along and blow it away, and the grain would fall down onto the threshing floor. And that was just how they threshed in those days. Now, Boaz was obviously wealthy. It alludes to that. And he was a relative of Ruth's late husband, which made him qualified and eligible to marry her. So she's going to go visit Boaz on the threshing floor at night. This is the instructions from her mother-in-law. Now do as I tell you. Take a bath and put on perfume and dress in your nicest clothes. Then go to the threshing floor, but don't let Boaz see you until he's finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do. Yeah, I'll bet he did. Now, folks, this is what's called ancient Hebrew flirting. Boaz got a little tipsy and laid down by the grain, and she came next to him and uncovered his feet. Now, uncovering of the feet is what makes this R-rated, because that wasn't his feet she uncovered. That's a euphemism. So you're not old enough to think about that, but that's what was happening there. Is he? Just use your imagination. And this is Ruth's response. I'll do everything you say, Ruth replied. So she went down to the threshing floor that night and followed the instructions of her mother-in-law. Now notice her grit. That took some courage to do that, I'm sure, but she was determined to make a better life no matter what. And I always think about that. You know, there's a movie called Boaz and Ruth that came out a couple of years ago, and it's a retelling of this story in the context of New York City in this time period. And Boaz in there, the guy who plays Boaz, is quite the stud, you know. He's really good. I got to thinking about that. What if Boaz was fat and ugly? You know, which he probably was. He was an older man, no doubt already married, probably had 2 or 3 wives already at least. And he'd been threshing all day. So this is the Middle East. Just think about what he must have smelled like as he lay down on that floor. You know, it's not just his presence there that would keep the thieves away. It's probably the smell just as bad. And this is what Ruth was encountering. She got herself all gussied up and went there. So here's how the narrative goes. After Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he lay down at the far end of the pile of grain and went to sleep. Then Ruth came quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Around midnight, Boaz suddenly woke up and turned over. He was surprised to find a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. Notice it says he was in good spirits. That's also a Hebrew euphemism for being drunk. So he was drunk. He's laying down, guarding the grain, so otherwise thieves would come and steal it. And then he had this little surprise. He found this woman laying next to him. She said, "I am your servant Ruth," she replied. "Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer." Now, family redeemer was a close relative of her deceased husband, and by law he was required to marry her and carry on her husband's name. Any children they had, any sons they had, would be considered the sons of the deceased husband. And it doesn't matter if you're already married, because polygamy was the norm in those days. And it's very likely that Boaz was already married. Polygamy was normal and acceptable in those days. And you could have as many wives as you could afford. And that was kind of just how it worked in those days. When people come to you and say they have this biblical definition of marriage, be suspicious. Because this is the Old Testament definition of marriage right here. You can have as many wives as you can afford. And they went for it. All right, so here the narrative goes on. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," Boaz exclaimed. "You are showing even more family loyalty now than you did before, for you have not gone after a younger man, whether rich or poor. Now don't worry about a thing, my daughter. I will do what is necessary, for everyone in town knows you are a virtuous woman." Now, the virtuous woman is translated from Eshet Hayal, and it literally means woman of valor. The loyalty was the virtue that impressed Boaz. You know, we would think of what Ruth was doing as being very virtuous today, but that's what it was, how it was defined in those days. She was being creative, she knew what she wanted, and she went for it. It's just that virtue means different things at different times in the Bible. And it goes on like this. "But while it is true that I am one of your family redeemers, there's another man who is more closely related to you than I am. Stay here tonight, and in the morning I will talk to him. If he is willing to redeem you, very well. Let him marry you. But if he's not willing, then as surely as the Lord lives, I will redeem you myself. Now lie down here until morning." Kind of takes the romance right out of it, doesn't it? Someone from her husband's family had to marry her. You got to remember, in those days, there's no Social Security, there's no bridge cards, there's nothing, no help available from any government of any kind. They barely had a government, and that's how widows survived. If you were a guy and your brother or your cousin died, you were responsible for his wife. You had to marry her, take her into your little harem, and have children with her. And so that's what Boaz was dealing with at this time. So Ruth lay at Boaz's feet until morning, but she got up before it was light enough for people to recognize each other. For Boaz had said, "No one must know that a woman was here at the threshing floor." Then Boaz said to her, "Bring your cloak and spread it out." He measured 6 scoops of barley into the cloak and placed it on her back. Then he returned to the town. Now, maybe I'm a little pessimistic here, but I think something naughty happened there during the night. And, like I said earlier, polygamy was considered normal. It was okay to have more than one wife, but adultery was a capital offense. So if you took someone else's wife, you could be put to death, but you could have as many women as you could afford. Now, he wanted Ruth to leave before the sun came up, because she would have probably been perceived as a prostitute had he not done that. And if anybody had seen her, she probably would have been accused of that. But she took that risk. She also risked rejection by Boaz. We talked about Boaz was probably some fat old rich guy. But what if he rejected Ruth, which he could have probably done. But instead, he took her cloak, which was like a big tarp, and we don't know how big the grain scoops were, but he gave her 6 scoops of grain, which was a lot of grain. So when Ruth went back to her mother-in-law Naomi and asked, "What happened, my daughter?" Ruth told Naomi everything Boaz had done for her. And he gave me these 6 scoops of barley and said, "Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed." Then Naomi said to her, "Just be patient, my daughter, until we hear what happens. The man won't rest until he's settled things today." Now, the point here is that grit involves patience. She needed a husband to survive in that society, and this was not the normal way of finding one. But grit, or valor, makes us creative, and she certainly got creative. Now, Jesus talked positively about combining grit with faith several times. We're going to look at his words from Matthew 7 here, where he says, "Keep on asking, and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking, and you will find. Keep on knocking, and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, everyone who seeks finds, and to everyone who knocks, the door will be opened." See, now this is about grit. This is about moxie. This is about combining grit with faith to get things done. And there's limitations, of course. I've used the illustration before. It's extremely unlikely at my age that no matter how much I pray and no matter how much I work, I will not be selected as an NFL quarterback. I've never played a game of football in my life. I was always the bookish nerd, I was told, I could be a quarterback for Detroit, but that's about it, and otherwise it's just unlikely. So there's limitations to this. But it is a simple fact that grit combined with faith works miracles. So ask yourself the question, what are some things in your life that need an application of grit and faith? Some of you are fighting an addiction of some sort. It takes a lot of grit and faith. Dealing with a mental illness. It's one of the toughest things anybody ever has to go through. It takes grit and faith. Dealing with a physical illness. It takes grit and faith to get through it. These are major things. And it applies to minor things too. Some folks need grit and faith just to get through a day's work. I joke a little bit about this, but that's what my basement looks like right now. And I'd probably be in trouble for showing this slide. How do you clean that up? Famous words are start in a corner and do just one trash can at a time. I counted 8 old computers down there, and keyboards and scanners and whatnot. Several VCRs, and there's even an 8-track recorder down there. How do you clean that up? One trash can at a time. We have 6 bedrooms in our house, and 3 of those bedrooms and the basement are essentially storage areas of stuff that my kids didn't take with them when they moved out. And if I talk about getting rid of it, I'm in instant trouble. No, you can store that for us. Why don't you rent a storage unit? But they don't want to do that. I tease Diane and say, we either have to get rid of some stuff or we have to get a bigger house because we just can't hold it all. Now, I know that if I stick with it, it'll get done. We can see how grit plus faith will help deal with the big things like chemo or the death of a loved one. But how does grit and faith help with the little things? Well, grit plus faith is what got me a doctorate. Now, I had a purpose. I was convinced that it would make me a better pastor. I could serve the Lord more effectively with more training. But how will grit plus faith help me clean out my basement? I don't know. Spent my whole life being a Bible scholar. And I'm fairly certain that God doesn't care if my basement's a mess. It isn't hurting anyone. I just don't have the motivation to take care of it. But I know that faith plus grit will get it done. I just need to add a purpose to it. When that professor talked to me about moving a haystack, it really hit me. You know, I've done that. You know, moving them one bale at a time. Faith plus grit will get us through many things. Faith plus grit will help us accomplish many things. Faith plus grit got Ruth a new husband and provider. Faith plus grit got us through chemo. Now, you may have a mountain that needs to be moved right now. You may have a crisis that you need to weather. And faith plus grit will make a big difference in how you do that. It's up to us to make that happen. But see, one of the most positive things about the faith that I've come to realize over the years is that God's in the redemption business. This is kind of the theme for next Sunday. God's in the redemption business, but he wants us to work with him. He's not going to do it alone. He'll help me clean that basement out if I ask him to. He'll give me the energy to do it. I haven't asked because I'm afraid he's going to say, go do it right now. But the thing is that, you know, he wants us to participate with him in the redemption process of whatever needs to be done. And that's where faith comes in with grit added to it, and then you can indeed move mountains. So let's try it and see. Let's pray together, shall we? Lord, through the example of Ruth, we learn a lot of things. We learn about situational ethics. We learn about grit. And we learn about faith. Help us to apply the principles of grit and faith to each of our lives. Help us to enjoy the fact that you want us to participate in the great story of redemption. Amen. As always, thanks again for joining us. We have 2 services on Sunday morning, and if you're in town, we'd invite you to come. One's at 9 o'clock and one's at 11 o'clock. And if you wish to support Layton Bethel, you can go to laytonbethel.org and follow the steps there on our website. Or you can just look at this QR code, scan it in with your phone, and you can give through Secure Give, and all your gifts will go directly into our account. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.